Hello and welcome to Wine Time with Ronnie at the Flight Theater and the Hollywood Fringe Festival. Here at the complex, we have a couple rules for you folks. Please turn off your phones and electronic devices and no flash photography. At the end of the show, or in case of an emergency, please exit out of the theater the same way you came in. Classy. And now, Wine Time with Ronnie.
There's no other man above you. What a wicked way to treat the girl that loves you. Well, they don't love you like I love you. Oh, down, they don't love you like I love you.
Something don't feel right because it ain't right, especially coming up after midnight. I smell your secrets and I'm not too perfect to ever feel it's worthless. How did it come down to this? Scrolling through your call list. Don't want to lose my pride, but I'ma fuck me up a bitch. You know I kept it sexy, you know I kept it fun. There's something that I'm missing, maybe my head.
Hello? Oh my goodness. I didn't know you were there. Oh God, I never would have danced like that if I'd known people were watching. Look, nobody wants to see a middle-aged woman dancing like that. I hope your eyes aren't bleeding. I do love Beyonce, though. Now that's one sexy young lady. With the hair, that face, the body. Now there's a booty you want to see shaking, am I right? It was unfortunate, though, that whole business with Jay-Z. Men capable of cheating even on the likes of Beyonce. Queen Bee! It's astounding, really. She could have anyone she wants. She probably stays with him for the sex. You know, I'm 54 years old, and at my age, you come to realize that sex, well, it just isn't that important. I'm sorry, where are my manners? I haven't even introduced myself yet. I'm Ronnie. It's Veronica, actually, but I've shortened it to Ronnie after my divorce because I thought it sounded more young and fun. Veronica is so serious, but Ronnie wants to have a good time, right? I didn't mean to turn the conversation to sex so quickly. You know, I just think it happens to be true that you reach a certain age where you start to understand that it's unseemly to expect that sort of attention. What with things sagging and spreading as they do. Can we really blame men if they're not that into it? Not that they're such peaches at this age either, mind you. Somehow it doesn't seem to matter. You know, there's always some young lady ready to receive them in all their silver fox glory. Silver fox. Now there's a term you don't often hear applied to a woman. Well, I suppose I ought to tell you a little bit about myself. I live here. I know it's a little grand for a woman living alone, but I got the house in my divorce, and I just haven't moved since. Well, we raised my daughter Jessie here. It's Jessica, actually. I call her Jessie. But she moved out when she was 18, and she gave birth to my granddaughter Claire within the year. That's right, I'm a grandmother. Don't I look fabulous? I'm kidding. I know I'm old as shit. But it is fun to tell people that I'm a grandmother to a teenager and see their shocked expressions. Well, I always say better to lie up rather than down about your age if you're looking for an ego boost. Much better than telling people you're 10 years younger than you are and having them look at you with that jaundiced eye like, a likely story. That's no fun at all. Trust me, I've tried it. Anyway, my granddaughter Claire, she's a senior in high school, studying filmmaking, heading to NYU in the fall. I just adore that girl. It's been such a joy to watch her grow up. I've been very fortunate to be very involved because her mother, my daughter Jessie, she's divorced from Claire's father. She has this very high-powered job in fashion. She's constantly traveling, Paris, New York, Milan, God knows where. But it sounds glamorous, and in some ways it is, but it has this very sad side to it. Jessie hardly ever sees Claire. Jessie's very active on social media. She's an extremely prolific selfie poster. And that's basically how she stays in touch with her daughter. The rest she delegates to me or at her own home to this lovely Honduran woman called Milagro, which I believe means miracle, and she most certainly is one. She and I have basically raised Claire, who I must say does have an inordinate amount of love for spicy foods. Claire's father has been of extremely limited utility, so really it's just been Milagro and me. Honestly, I think I really fucked things up with Jessie. Pardon my French, but it's true. I couldn't wait to get out of my mother's house, but I always hoped things would be different with my own daughter. But in the end, Jessie couldn't wait to get out of my house, or her husband of 3 years' house, or really any house with someone else in it. You're my mother. My mother was stingy with love and a staunch disciplinarian. Oh, she didn't beat me or anything. She was a firm believer in the axiom that young ladies should be seen and not heard. If you ask her, I think she would say all she did was put me on a few strict diets, take the breadbasket away at restaurants, and tell me if I was fat, no one would ever love me. It was the 70s, after all. She had this beautiful needlepoint cushion on her bed that said, "You can never be too rich or too thin." She used to say that women with eating disorders were lucky. Unless they died, of course. She didn't say that, but I always assumed it was implied. You know, I don't mean to cast aspersions. My mother did try to do things for me that she thought would help me. I grew up in Philadelphia, and my mother wanted me to be cultured. So she would take me to the theater, which I absolutely loved. My favorite show of all time was Gypsy. If you don't know it, it's this musical about this stage mother, Rose, and her 2 daughters, June and Louise. June is this extroverted, blonde, bubbly little girl, and Rose is desperate for June to be a big star in vaudeville. And Louise is sort of a bookish, ugly duckling. And Louise plays the front end of the dancing cow in their act. Well, June ends up running off with one of the boys from the act, leaving Louise to carry the act all by herself. Only Louise is no star. And through a series of mishaps, they end up getting booked into this burlesque theater by mistake. Well, they're so desperate and hard up for work at this point that Louise decides she's going to go on anyway and try to do some version of a striptease. We see her. It's a gut-wrenching scene. You see her standing up there looking like a deer in the headlights, totally terrified. And men are catcalling at her to take something off. But then, as if by magic, Louise transforms into this sexy, beautiful, confident creature, Gypsy Rose Lee, who can have an entire room full of men riveted to her just by dropping one strap and shaking one hip. I figured, if Louise could transform, then so could I, and I used to practice her routine in my mirror. Let me entertain you. Let me make you smile. Let me do a few kicks, some old and then some new tricks. I'm very versatile. And if you're real good, I'll make you feel good. I want your spirits to climb. So let me entertain you, and we'll have a real good time. Yes, sir. We'll have a real good time.
Bravo!
to the theater, and reenacting those moments in my mirror, those were magical escapes for me. My mother did always make sure to bring me back down to earth by telling me that those who perform in theater are flakes losers and not to be taken seriously. I have to believe that my mother did things out of some sort of love, or at least some protective instinct. You know, I think she really believed that if I wasn't a thin, disciplined, well-behaved girl, then maybe my life would be ruined. Who knows? Maybe she was right. But in any event, I wanted to do things really differently with my own daughter. So with Jessie, I made every effort to be her BFF. Talked to her about everything. Even my sex life with her father.
Oh.
I know. But in the end, she wasn't having any of it. I think she just thought I was some sort of alien sent to Earth for the sole purpose of humiliating her. And where my mother would take the breadbasket away, I was practically shoving it in Jessie's face. I thought that made me an enlightened mother. But Jessie was on to me. Because even as I was saying, enjoy food, enjoy life, I wasn't doing any of that. I was practically starving myself, calling myself fat every time I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. I told Jessie she could be anything she wanted, but meanwhile, I wasn't anything at all. Except very thin for a time. I think I believed that if I could just stay thin, everything would be all right. Well, that may be the one takeaway that Jessie got from me, that thinness equals happiness. The rare East Coast luncheons I share with Jessie and my mother these days are rather dismal affairs, with each of them ordering a side of steamed spinach or broccolini, and me left to polish off all the Pinot Grigio and carrot cake all by myself. Anyway, the silver lining in all this is I've been extremely fortunate to be a very hands-on grandmother to Claire. These days, you know, Claire's very busy with her own life, and it does get quiet around here. Oh, and please, don't tell me I should be online dating. I've been down that road already, thank you very much. Lots of unfortunate old man penis pictures. You know, it's not such a beautiful organ anyway, and then when you add saggy balls to the mix, it's really rather disturbing. Honestly, I did do fairly well online, with the over 70 said. And I did even contemplate running off into the sunset with one of them. I fantasized that he might hold my hand at the movies. We'd go wine tasting in Provence, where we'd run into Diane Lane or some British ladies in period dress. Companionship is very compelling. I'll admit I did have my reservations about the age difference, but I figured I get along very well with my uncle, so why not some other man 25 years my senior? But in the end, it wasn't meant to be. I had to start taking some medication, and I gained a bit of weight, and we parted ways shortly after that. You know, he told me I was getting a little lazy with myself, which I thought was rather in poor taste. So I secretly replaced all of his generic Viagra with my estrogen pills in the hopes that he might enjoy some hormonally induced weight gain. Well, his next young lady must have had quite a shock when instead of an erection she found shrunken testicles. I'm kidding. I'm sure he figured it out. I do hope he's okay. Speaking of older men and younger women, do you want to know a fun fact I recently learned? For the past 20 years or so, Playboy has not had a nude model over the age of 42. They used to do that. They used to mix things up a bit. Farrah Fawcett posed at age 50 in 1997, and Nancy Sinatra posed at age 54 in 1995. But these days, I guess, middle-aged tits and ass just hasn't been seen as mainstream enough for the average American man to beat off to. Instead, we've been relegated to some fringy internet category of a step above necrophilia or bestiality. MILFs. Sexy MILF. German MILF. Step MILF with stepson. Honestly. Oh, not that I've looked. I don't look at porn. Pornography. But I've heard, anecdotally. Oh, for those of you who don't know, MILF stands for Mother I'd Like to Fuck. The implication being, I guess, that even though presumably they had to engage in some sexual activity in order to become mothers in the first place, perhaps they even really liked it. Maybe they discovered they were multi-orgasmic in their late 40s. But in any event, once they become mothers, we no longer want to fuck them unless they are this special breed of mother, a MILF, like a magical unicorn that vomits rainbows. Or anything else she eats, for that matter. I'm kidding. She doesn't have to be bulimic. She just has to work out a lot and never eat pasta. Well, my point being that, perhaps more of our marriages would survive if we decided collectively that women over the age of 40, perhaps in their sexual prime, are maybe worthy of healthy middle-aged men's sexual attention. Well, it's just an idea, it's probably crazy and hormonally induced. I'm sorry, if I seem bitter, I'm not. That whole being cheated on with a younger woman scenario is not my story. No, my ex-husband and I, Ben, we divorced and then he shacked up with a series of much younger women. So it's really quite different, I think. Ben was 60 when he met his current wife, and she was 25. They do seem to get along very well. She enjoys taking care of him, and he enjoys being taken care of. She's pregnant now. It's kind of amazing, just as my body is closing up shop, there's my 60-something ex and his lovely young bride setting up their nursery. Well, I'm sure she'll make a truly excellent mother. She's very sweet and easygoing, and I wasn't always like that when we were married. I was often frustrated, and I couldn't always articulate why. I mean, we had this whole feminist revolution after all. We could work full-time and raise babies at the same time, and get abortions, get divorced. It's this embarrassment of riches, really. But despite all that, I always had this feeling of discontent, like things just weren't quite right for me. I guess I always felt that nothing I did really mattered much to anyone. I have a confession to make. I went to a well-respected university. I think I'm reasonably intelligent. I'm kind and I'm generous. I think people like me. Despite all that, despite having given up on sex and then dating, I still think about one thing, possibly more than anything else. And it's not global warming or the AIDS crisis or childhood poverty. It's, am I fuckable? And I don't mean under any circumstances. I've been married, I have a daughter, I dated. I know the answer is yes, but what I'm talking about is different. Every time I look in the mirror, and I do that all the time. Why do I do that so much? Oh, my mind goes right to that question. if someone were to see me on the street and he didn't know anything about me, nothing about who I am or where I come from, if all he gets is this and a look in my eyes, would he? When I'm sitting in traffic and I happen to meet the eye of the man opposite me and we lock eyes for a moment, I think, is he thinking about fucking me? Or is he just making sure the coast is clear so he can make his left turn? Or that nice-looking grandfather at Claire's Cinema Studies presentation. What was that greeting from him? Was he thinking about fucking me? And was his wife sufficiently threatened by my level of fuckability to take me seriously? Or this? Does my mother think that my failure to look sufficiently fuckable is the reason that my marriage fell apart? And was it? As I tell you all this, I can hardly believe how much mental energy I spend on this question. It seems to me I could be doing a whole lot of good for the world if I could just devote these mental resources elsewhere. But I've been thinking this way really as long as I can remember. Long before I ever started fucking anyone. Perhaps I should stop saying fuck so very much. Let's switch gears. All these stories we're hearing right now about men trying to show off their willies to unsuspecting young women? That's a real problem, right? I certainly don't want Claire to go into her first place of employment But even though taking one's member out at inappropriate times and places is a problem, to be sure, perhaps at least some of those men aren't necessarily horrible people. Maybe they just have this issue where they want to be looked at and desired. It actually sounds rather relatable to me, this idea of having something you normally keep hidden and wanting to expose it and have it be seen and maybe admired. Well, honestly, it makes me a little sad. Seen that way, I think it's rather forgivable. What's not forgivable to me, honestly, are those men who just get away with being out-and-out cads. The ones who make women feel ashamed to be alive if we're not perfect physical specimens. Perfect tens, they might say. I wouldn't dream of naming any names, but, Believe me? I think we're all familiar with at least one man who's been known to rape women in that way. There are these DJs that Claire and I used to listen to on the way to school in the mornings. And on their morning show, they would announce the celebrity birthdays for the day. And for the female celebrities that they thought were hot, they would ring a little bell. And for those not hot enough, no bell. Well, one morning, they were talking about this actress whom I happen to love, and they were saying how she'd been sexually harassed by a famous TV journalist. And they were hemming and hawing, and you could practically hear them patting themselves on the back over the airwaves about how politically correct and what concerned men they were. Then they went on to announce the celebrity birthdays, and it happened to be this actress's birthday. And when they announced her birthday, no bell for her. Well, I was apoplectic. I said to Claire, we should write those shits a letter, and she said, do it! Honestly, I would rather have a man show me his dick than be a dick. I was never sexually harassed in an office. I didn't work in an office, but that's not the point. The point is, I feel like I've experienced plenty of frustration as a woman, but frankly, I just feel a little left out of the whole #MeToo thing. Is it weird that I find myself jealous of some of those office girls. With their bosses so hungry for them that they send them emails and texts enumerating all the maddeningly enticing things about them and all the things they want to do to them. Your ass drives me insane. I want to get in you deep and hard. And things like that. I mean, please don't get me wrong. I understand why it's a problem. I'm not an idiot, but isn't it also, in addition to being potentially threatening and scary, sort of, complimentary? And when I was a girl, barely pubescent, I had a crush on a boy named Donnie. He was 2 years older than I was, and I thought he was just beautiful. I used to see him and his friends riding their bikes around the neighborhood, and once I thought he might have even smiled at me. Years passed, and I was walking alone in the neighborhood. I was probably 13 at the time, and Donnie and his friends passed by in a car. And as they did, Donnie leaned his head out the window, and he yelled, "She be fucking ugly!" And he laughed. And it just stuck with me. Just stuck with me forever. It took less than a minute. You know, I wish I could remember a quarter of what I've learned in my life as well as I remember that moment. You know, math. Or where Zimbabwe is. But instead I remember that. Clear as a bell. It was so cruel. In that moment, I felt the weight of my failure as a female so heavily I could hardly breathe. I stopped dancing around in my mirror. Everything changed. Fortunately, raising Claire, when I have raised her, well, she continues to amaze and astound me. She's the smartest person I know. She's not like you or me. She's special. Like those kids you see on the news changing the world. They see things differently. Better, I think, than we do. A few months ago, Claire was over and we were watching Gypsy for the millionth time. We're regulars at every revival house in the city. We've been slowly making our way through the canon of classic films. But Gypsy, we cuddle up and watch together at least once a year. After the movie, we got to talking. She'd been very quiet all evening, and then she turned to me and she said, "I have a confession to make. I'm not going to go to NYU in the fall." For some strange reason, I didn't launch into anything. I just calmly said, "Please explain." She went on to say, "Grandma, if I go to New York in the fall, who will be here to take care of you? Well, that's what's most important to me." I very wisely just let that sit there, and then I said, "I have a confession, too." I have no idea why, but I told her how I had always thought of myself as Louise, and how I had always longed to transform into Gypsy Rose Lee. And she laughed, and she took my face in her hands, and she said, "Grandma, why would you want to be Gypsy?" Gypsy turned into a pathetic, spotlight-seeking narcissist, just like her mother. But Gypsy's not a story about a woman who triumphs. It's a tragedy about a woman who spends her whole life trying to please and impress a mother who will never give her what she needs and loses herself in the process. We have these moments in life. Moments where you realize that the Picasso that's been hanging on the dining room wall for 30 years has been upside down the whole time. Oh, I absolutely forgot to tell you. Remember those DJs I told you about? The ones with the bells for the hot ladies and the no bell for the not hot? Well, that very afternoon when I picked Claire up from school, she said, let's go write that letter. So we raced home and we fired off this deeply impassioned mic drop letter to those DJs. We never got a response, but the next morning we listened for the celebrity birthdays and there were no bells. Not for anyone. Well, my partner in crime and I, we did that. We changed a little corner of the world. Once you have a partner in crime like that, you don't fuck that shit up. And I had no intention of fucking things up with Claire. You're probably wondering why this house is so empty. Well, earlier today, when I was all tootsed up, I was signing the papers and collecting my money. I sold this place. I've lived here for 30 years. I made a fucking fortune! And that fortune is for Claire and for me as we start our new lives in New York City. My partner in crime and I, we decided that we're going to be there for each other no matter what. I've already got an apartment in the city. It's only a 10-minute subway ride from NYU. I've mapped out all the revival houses and all of the Broadway shows and where they're playing. Well, these are the last of my things. The rest is on a truck already. Probably somewhere around St. Louis by now. Tonight, Claire and I are going to board a red-eye for New York City. Where we'll have a real good time. Yes,